I need to tell you what happened in Ganley, West Virginia, because it's going to happen again in 11 days, and nobody there is going to stop it. Nobody there can stop it. They've known what it is for longer than I've been alive, and they don't think of it as something to stop. They think of it as something to get through. The way you get through a blizzard, the way you get through a funeral. You board up, you follow the procedure, you wait for morning, and you don't talk about the parts that don't make sense, because making sense was never the point. Getting through was the point. I did not get through. I got out. Those are different things, and the difference is that everyone who gets through is still in Ganley, and everyone who gets out can never be sure they actually did. My name is Nora Elkins. I'm 38. Until 5 weeks ago, I was a sheriff's dispatcher for Ganley County, which is a county that does not appear on most maps of West Virginia because it shouldn't, because it was an administrative error made during a redistricting survey in 1933 that no one corrected, and the people who live in the area it encompasses, roughly 1,100 people spread across 6 hollows and 1 census-designated place called Ganley proper, have organized their entire civic existence around a jurisdiction that, legally speaking, is a clerical ghost. I should be more precise. Ganley County has a sheriff. It has a courthouse. It has a dispatch office in the basement of that courthouse with 2 desks, a radio system from 1997, and a laminated sheet of paper zip-tied to a clipboard that contains 6 rules I was read aloud before my first night alone in that room. Those rules are not strange because of what they instruct you to do. They are strange because of what they assume is already happening. They are written in a voice that presupposes a situation so specific and so ongoing that by the time you're reading them, you're already inside it. You don't discover what's wrong with Ganley. You arrive and Ganley is already wrong, and the rules are a map of the wrongness, and nobody is confused about any of it except you. That's what I need to explain. Not the rules themselves, the fact that an entire community has organized itself, calmly and competently, around something that should be impossible. And my failure was in believing I was the one person who could see clearly enough to fix it. I was wrong about everything. I moved to Ganley County in late January 2026 because my mother asked me to, and because she was dying. And because when your mother is dying in a place you left at 18 and swore you'd never return to, the swearing turns out to be the part that doesn't hold. I wasn't broke. I want to be clear about that. I'd worked for 13 years as a 911 dispatcher in Fairfax County, Virginia, Northern Virginia, the suburban D.C. sprawl, one of the highest volume dispatch centers on the East Coast. I was good at it. I was very good at it. I could manage 12 simultaneous incident channels and keep my voice flat enough to talk a panicking parent through infant CPR while routing fire and EMS to 2 separate addresses. I had commendations, I had seniority, I had a pension track and a condo in Herndon, and a life that was orderly and structured and miles from the mountains I'd grown up in. My mother called on January 4th. She had pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed in November, and she hadn't told me until she couldn't manage the stairs to her bedroom anymore. She was in the house I'd grown up in, a wood frame place on Stiller Creek about 4 miles outside Ganley proper, and she needed someone there. Not a hospice service, she said. Someone who knew the house, someone who knew the land, someone who could handle things when the time came. She didn't say what things meant. I assumed she meant the dying. I took a leave of absence from Fairfax County. I drove 6 hours through the mountains on I-64 and then south on increasingly narrow state roads that eventually became county roads that eventually became gravel, that eventually became the kind of track where you're not driving on a road anymore, you're driving on the memory of one. The GPS lost signal 30 minutes before I arrived. The last cell tower was in Raynell, 26 miles north. Ganley proper is a cluster of maybe 40 structures in a valley between two ridges that are too steep to farm and too scrubby to log. There's a post office that shares a building with the volunteer fire department. There's a general store that sells gas from a single pump, and groceries from shelves that are stocked once a week by a truck from Lewisburg. There's a church, Free Will Baptist, with a congregation of about 60. And there's the courthouse, which is a 2-story cinder block building with a courtroom on the upper floor that's used for town meetings, and a basement that contains the sheriff's office and the dispatch center. The sheriff is a man named Dale Mackey. He's 59, born in Ganley, has been sheriff for 22 years, and is the kind of man who will be described at his funeral as someone who did what needed doing, which is a phrase that means different things in different places and means something very specific in Ganley. I met Dale on my second day. My mother had mentioned that the county was looking for a part-time dispatcher because their previous one, a woman named Carol Estes, had retired in December. I wasn't planning to take the job. I was planning to take care of my mother. But my mother, even dying, was the kind of person who believed that sitting idle was a moral failing. And she suggested I talk to Dale because it'll be good for you to have something to do when I'm sleeping, and I sleep a lot now, Nora. So I went to the courthouse. Dale was at his desk in the basement, a big man in a khaki uniform with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same sandstone as the ridges outside. He knew who I was before I introduced myself. Everyone in Ganley knew Barbara Elkins' daughter was back. "Fairfax County," he said, looking at the resume I'd brought. "That's a real operation." "Yes, sir." "This is not a real operation. I got me 2 part-time deputies and a radio that works most of the time. You'd be overnight dispatch 8 to 6, 3 nights a week, mostly nothing. Occasionally a domestic or a car in a ditch. Pay is $16 an hour from the county fund, which is cash because we don't do direct deposit." "That's fine." "You'll be alone in this room. I go home at 8. Deputies go home unless there's a call, and there's usually not a call. You sit here, you monitor the radio, you log anything that comes in, and if something happens you can't handle, you call my cell, which works about half the time depending on the weather." "I've done this for 13 years, Sheriff. I can handle a quiet room." He looked at me for a long moment, not assessing my competence, assessing something else. "Your mother ever talked to you about how things work here?" "She told me to talk to you about the dispatcher job." "That's not what I asked." I didn't know what he was asking. I said no. Dale opened a drawer and took out a clipboard. There was a laminated sheet zip-tied to it, the kind of thing you'd see in any workplace. Procedural reminders, safety protocols, the bureaucratic furniture of American labor. He set it on the desk between us. "I'm going to read you these," he said. "Then I'm going to ask you if you still want the job. Then we're not going to talk about them again unless something goes wrong, and if you do the job right, nothing will go wrong." He picked up the clipboard and read. He read slowly, clearly, the way you read something you've memorized but are choosing to read aloud anyway because the act of reading matters, because it makes it official, because a thing read aloud from a laminated sheet in a county office becomes procedural rather than impossible. This is what he read. "Rule 1. Between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m., you will receive exactly 1 call per hour on the landline. The caller will identify themselves by a family name and a road name. Log the name and the time. Do not ask questions. Do not deviate from the logging format. If you do not receive a call during any given hour, log no contact and the time and continue. Rule 2. At 11 p.m., you will receive a call that is not from a family. The voice will be a child's. The child will ask if anyone has come in. Say no. If someone has come into the office since your shift began, do not say yes. Say no regardless of the truth. Rule 3. The radio will activate between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. You will hear what sounds like a deputy requesting backup at a specific location. Do not dispatch anyone. Do not respond. Do not key the mic. Log the time and the location named. If the same location is named 3 nights in a row, tell the sheriff in the morning. Rule 4. The courthouse door locks at 8 p.m. Do not unlock it for any reason before 6 a.m. If someone knocks, you may speak to them through the door. You may offer to radio for assistance. You may not open the door. This includes known persons. This includes the sheriff. Rule 5. If the landline rings between 3:15 a.m. and 3:45 a.m. outside of the hourly schedule, do not answer. Let it ring. Count the rings. Log the count. If the count exceeds 40, leave the room and wait in the hallway until 4 a.m. Take the clipboard with you. Rule 6. At 5:45 a.m., make a final entry in the log. Write the word clear and the date. This is not optional. If you cannot write clear because something in the preceding 8 hours made it untrue, write what happened instead. But understand that no dispatcher has ever written anything other than clear, and you should think carefully about what it would mean to be the first. Dale set the clipboard down. Questions, he said. Not a question, an offer. I had many questions. I asked none of them. This is the thing I want you to understand about me, and it's the thing that made everything go wrong. I did not ask questions because I thought the rules were theater. I thought they were a small-town tradition, a local superstition given procedural language to make the new dispatcher feel important, a hazing ritual dressed up as protocol. I had worked in one of the most sophisticated emergency communication centers in the country. I had handled real crises, shootings, building collapses, the 2019 metro derailment. I looked at those 6 rules and I saw a community that had been isolated so long it had built a folklore around the night shift and codified it. Because codifying things is what Americans do. We turn everything into procedure. It's our national art form. I said I'd take the job. Dale said start Thursday. I went home and told my mother. She was in her recliner with an oxygen tube and a quilt, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. You'll follow the rules, she said. Not a question. Mom, it's a dispatch desk in a basement. You'll follow the rules, Nora. Sure. Say it. I looked at her. She was 67 years old and maybe 105 pounds. A woman who had taught high school biology for 30 years and had the most organized spice rack in Greenbrier County. A woman who believed in order and sense and the scientific method, and she was looking at me with total, calm, unsuperstitious conviction. I'll follow the rules, I said. She nodded. Good. Then she turned back to her book and I went to the kitchen to make dinner, and I did not think about the rules again until Thursday. My first shift was February 5th. Dale walked me through the equipment. The radio, the landline, the logbook, which was an actual paper ledger with ruled lines and dated columns going back years. He showed me the bathroom down the hall, the coffee maker, the space heater that supplemented the building's unreliable furnace. He left at 8:05 p.m. I heard his truck start in the lot above me, heard the gravel crunch as he pulled away, and then I was alone in a cinder block basement in a county that didn't legally exist, with a radio and a landline and a clipboard with 6 laminated rules. I'm going to tell you about that first night in detail because it was the night the rules worked, and you need to know what working looks like before I can explain what not working looks like. At 8:42 p.m., the landline rang. I picked it up. This is Nora, Ganley Dispatch. Prater, Stiller Creek Road, checking in. A woman's voice, older, matter of fact. Logged, thank you. She hung up. No pleasantries, no questions. I wrote it in the ledger. 8:42 p.m. Prater, Stiller Creek Road. At 9:38 p.m., another call. Haney Doss Hollow Road, a man's voice. I logged it. At 10:15 p.m., Goff, Upper Elk Fork. At 10:51 p.m., Mackey, Ridgeline Road. I recognized the name. The sheriff's family. I was starting to understand. These were check-ins. The families along the roads were calling in, one per hour, confirming. What? Their presence? Their safety? That they were still there? At 11 p.m. exactly, the phone rang. I picked it up. Has anyone come in? It was a child, a girl, maybe 7 or 8, with a voice that was clear and close, as though she were calling from the next room rather than through a phone line. There was no background noise, no breathing other than the words themselves. No, I said. Okay. She hung up. I sat with the receiver in my hand for a few seconds. My pulse had done something. Not spiked exactly, but shifted, the way your heart adjusts when you step from a warm building into cold air. Not fear. Recognition. Some part of me, below the professional confidence, below the Fairfax County training, recognized that the voice on that phone was wrong in a way I couldn't identify and didn't want to. I logged it. 11 p.m. Child call, answered per protocol. At 11:48 p.m., Estep, Lower Elk Fork. Another check-in. At 1:14 a.m., the radio crackled to life. Dispatch, this is Unit 2. I've got a 1050 on Doss Hollow, requesting backup, vehicle in the creek, possible entrapment. My hand went to the mic. 13 years of training fired through my nervous system like a current. Someone was calling for help. A car in a creek. Possible entrapment. In February. In water that would be maybe 34 degrees. I reached for the mic, and my fingers touched the key, and I stopped. Do not dispatch anyone. Do not respond. Do not key the mic. I pulled my hand back. The voice continued. Dispatch, copy. I need fire and rescue on Doss Hollow, mile 2 south side. There's someone in this vehicle. Dispatch? It sounded exactly like a real call. The cadence, the controlled urgency, the specific location. If I'd heard this in Fairfax County, I'd have had 2 units rolling in seconds. Here, alone, I sat on my hands. The radio went silent at 1:31 a.m. I logged it. 1:14 a.m. Radio activation, location, Doss Hollow, mile 2, south side. The rest of the night was check-ins, 1 per hour, a family name and a road, like a roll call. At 5:45 a.m., I wrote clear and the date. Dale arrived at 6:10. He looked at the log. He nodded. Same location as last Tuesday on the radio, he said. Is there actually a car in the creek on Doss Hollow? No. How do you know? Because it's been calling from Doss Hollow for 3 weeks and Doss Hollow is dry. Creek froze in January. There's no water to put a car in. What happens if it calls from Doss Hollow 3 nights in a row? Then I go have a look in the daytime. With company. A look at what? Dale closed the logbook. At where it's trying to send us. I drove home. My mother was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with tea. She looked at me, and I could see her reading my face the way she used to read my report cards, looking for the trouble spots. Clear? She said. Clear. She nodded and went back to her tea. I went to bed and I slept, and I did not dream. And that was the last normal night I had in Ganley County. I worked Thursdays, Saturdays, and Mondays. February was cold and uneventful. The check-ins came on schedule. The families rotated. There were maybe 15 total, and they cycled through the hours in a pattern I eventually realized was a weekly roster. Each family checked in during a specific hour on a specific night, and the roster was arranged so that every road in the county was represented at least once per night. They were counting themselves. That's what I eventually understood. The hourly calls weren't about reassurance. They were a census. A nightly census conducted by the families themselves, logged by the dispatcher, confirming that the population of Ganley County was unchanged from the previous night. The child called at 11 every night. "Has anyone come in?" I said no. She said okay. The call lasted 4 seconds. The radio activated between 1 and 3 every night. Always a deputy voice, always a specific location, always a request for backup that I was not to answer. The locations changed every few days. Doss Hollow, then Upper Elk Fork, then a stretch of Route 7 near the church, then back to Doss Hollow. I logged them all. I did not ask questions, not because I was afraid, because I was arrogant. I believed that if I observed long enough, I would understand the system without needing anyone to explain it to me. I would figure out the pattern, and the pattern would reveal the logic, and the logic would turn the supernatural into the mundane, because that is what logic does. It domesticates. And I had more logic, more training, more professional experience with emergency systems than anyone who had ever sat in that chair. This was the disposition that destroyed me. Not fear, not curiosity, certainty. I was certain I was the most capable person in the room, and the room was a county, and the county was wrong about itself, and I was going to understand it better than it understood itself. In early March, my mother's condition worsened. The hospice nurse from Lewisburg started coming 3 times a week. My mother slept 16, 18 hours a day. When she was awake, she was lucid but fading, and she talked to me about the house and the land and the things she wanted me to know. On March 7th, she said something that I wrote off at the time and have replayed in my head every day since. "The count has to be right, Nora." I was changing her sheets. What count? The nightly count. The families call in. The dispatcher logs them. The count has to match. Match what? The number. The real number. How many people are in the county at night? 1,100, give or take. No, the real number. The number the land knows. I tucked the sheet in. "Mom, you're tired. The land knows how many people are here. It's always known. When the count matches, nothing moves. When the count doesn't match, when someone new arrives, or someone leaves without being accounted for, or when the number in the log doesn't match the number in the ground, the land sends something to look for the difference. That's what the radio calls are. It's looking. It's checking the places where the number might be wrong." "Mom, you came here. You changed the number. You were added to the count. Dale would have done that when he hired you. The families would have been told. But you need to understand that you're in the number now. You're part of the count. And if you do something that makes the count wrong, the land won't stop looking until it finds the error." She fell asleep. I finished the sheets. I made dinner. I went to work that night and logged the check-ins and said no to the child and did not answer the radio. And I thought about what my mother had said. And I decided she was a dying woman on morphine who had lived in an isolated community for too long and had absorbed its mythology as fact. I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong in the way you might think. My mother wasn't delusional. She was precise. She was exactly as precise as she had always been. The biology teacher who labeled every slide and graded every paper to the decimal point. And what she told me about the count was accurate. What she didn't tell me, what she might not have known, or what she knew and was too tired or too careful to say, was what happens when the person who makes the count wrong is the dispatcher. March 15th, Saturday night shift. The weather had been brutal all week. An ice storm had coated everything from Rainelle south in a 1/4 inch of glaze, and the roads into Ganley were impassable for 2 days. The general store didn't get its delivery. The power flickered. The kind of weather that makes you understand why people settled in valleys in the first place, and also why they probably shouldn't have. The check-ins that night were slower than usual. The first call came at 8:55, later than normal. Prater, Stiller Creek Road. The voice was strained, tired. The ice had been hard on everyone. At 9:30, no call. I waited. 9:45, 9:50. At 9:58, the phone rang. Haney, Doss Hollow Road. But the voice was different. Not the man who usually called, a woman, younger. Everything okay out there? I asked. Silence. Ma'am, you okay? Just log it. She hung up. I'd broken format. Rule 1, do not ask questions. I'd asked a question, not because I forgot the rule, because I was a dispatcher. Asking if the caller is okay is what dispatchers do. It's the first thing we're trained to do. It's the foundation of emergency communication. Establish the caller's status. I logged it and moved on. At 10 p.m., no call. At 10:15, no call. At 10:30, no call. I wrote no contact for the 10 p.m. hour, per the rules. First time that had happened. The 11 o'clock child call came on time. Has anyone come in? No. Okay. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the quality of the silence between the calls. The basement of the Ganley County courthouse is a quiet place on any night. Cinder block walls, no windows, a low ceiling with fluorescent panels that buzz at a frequency just below perception. But this silence was different. It was the silence of a room that was being listened to. Not from inside, from below. The way you can feel someone standing on the other side of a wall, even when you can't see or hear them. A pressure, a presence that was defined entirely by the quality of its attention. I logged the 11 p.m. call. I waited for the midnight check-in. It came. Goff, Upper Elk Fork. I said thank you. No questions. Back in format. At 12:47 a.m., before the radio's usual window, my cell phone lit up. This shouldn't have been possible. There was no cell service in Ganley. My phone hadn't had a signal since Raynell. But there it was on the desk. Screen bright. Incoming call. Number blocked. I didn't answer. There was no rule about cell phones because there was no expectation of cell service. But the rules were about the landline and the radio. And a cell phone call from a non-existent signal felt like exactly the kind of thing I shouldn't interact with. It rang 9 times and stopped. At 1:08 a.m., the radio activated. Dispatch, this is Unit 2. I have a possible 1054 on Stiller Creek Road, Mile 4, single structure, requesting welfare check. Stiller Creek Road, Mile 4, my mother's house. My mother who was dying, who was alone tonight because the hospice nurse couldn't get through the ice, who was in a house with no landline and no cell signal, and who I had left at 7:30 p.m. sleeping in her recliner with the oxygen on and the quilt tucked around her legs. I reached for the mic. I stopped. Do not dispatch anyone. Do not respond. Do not key the mic. The voice continued. Dispatch, I need someone at the Elkins residence, Stiller Creek Road. I've got a female down, not responsive, possible cardiac event. My mother's name, my mother's house, my mother's road. Dispatch, do you copy? This is time sensitive. Female is Barbara Elkins, age 67. Known medical history. I need EMS. Every fiber of my training was screaming at me. Someone was reporting my mother as unresponsive. The protocol. The real protocol. The Fairfax County protocol. The protocol that had governed my professional life for 13 years. Was to dispatch immediately, confirm the location, get help moving. People died in the gap between the call and the response. I knew this. I had heard people die in that gap. I had lived inside that gap for over a decade. I keyed the mic. Unit 2, this is dispatch. Confirm your location and the status of the individual. The moment I pressed the transmit button, I knew I'd done something wrong. Not because of the rules, because of the sound. The radio didn't behave the way a radio behaves when you transmit. There was no squelch, no static break. The sound that came through the speaker after I released the key was not a deputy's voice. It was mine. My own voice, exactly as I'd just spoken, played back to me from the radio speaker. Unit 2, this is dispatch. Confirm your location and the status of the individual. And then, beneath it, layered, like an echo from a deeper room. Confirm your location. Confirm, confirm, confirm. The radio went dead. The silence that followed was the worst silence I've ever experienced in a professional setting. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of consequence. I had keyed the mic. I had responded to a broadcast I'd been told never to respond to. And the thing on the other end, whatever it was, now had my voice. I sat in that chair for 4 hours. The check-in calls continued. The families kept counting themselves. At 2 a.m., Estep, Lower Elk Fork. At 3 a.m., Mackey, Ridgeline Road. The normalcy of the calls made the wrongness of what I'd done more vivid, the way a clean room makes a single blood stain impossible to ignore. At 3:22 a.m., the landline rang. This was outside the hourly schedule. This was inside the 3:15 to 3:45 window from Rule 5. I was not supposed to answer. I did not answer. It rang. I counted. 1, 2, 3. On and on. A steady mechanical pulse, each ring identical. 10, 15, 20. I logged the count as it climbed. 25, 30, 35, 40. If the count exceeds 40, leave the room and wait in the hallway until 4 a.m. 41, 42. I grabbed the clipboard and left. I stood in the hallway. A narrow cinderblock corridor with one flickering fluorescent tube and the bathroom door and the stairs leading up to the courthouse lobby. And I listened to the phone ring through the closed dispatch room door. I counted from the hallway. 50, 60, 70. At 83, it stopped. I waited until 4 a.m. I went back in. The log was where I'd left it. The room was unchanged, but the radio was on. Not transmitting, not receiving. Just on. The green power light illuminated, the channel display showing a frequency I didn't recognize. Not our frequency. Not any frequency in the band we used. I turned it off. I turned it back on. It returned to our frequency. Everything seemed normal. At 5:45 a.m., I sat down to make my final entry. Clear and the date. I picked up the pen, and I could not write it. Because it wasn't true. I had keyed the mic. I had responded to the radio. I had broken Rule 3. The night had not been clear. Something had happened, and writing clear would be a lie, and Rule 6 was explicit. If you cannot write clear because something in the preceding 8 hours made it untrue, write what happened instead. But it was also explicit about the consequence. No dispatcher has ever written anything other than clear, and you should think carefully about what it would mean to be the first. I sat with the pen over the page for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I wrote clear. I wrote it because I was afraid. Not of the thing on the radio, not of the ringing phone, but of being the person who broke the record, of being the first, of introducing an error into a log that had been continuous and clean for years. I told myself it was a judgment call. I told myself the mic key had been momentary, inconsequential. I told myself that clear was close enough. I was the dispatcher. I was the one who kept the count, and I falsified it. I drove home at 6:15 a.m. My mother was alive. She was in her recliner, awake, oxygen on, watching the window. The ice outside was beginning to melt in the gray dawn. She looked at me when I walked in. "I heard you on the radio," she said. "What?" "The radio in the kitchen, the scanner. It picked up the county frequency around 1 this morning. I heard you respond to a call." She had a police scanner. Of course she did. She was a Ganley County resident, and the scanner was how isolated families monitored their world. Everyone had one. "Mom, that wasn't—" "I heard your voice, Nora. And then I heard your voice again, but it wasn't you. It was using your voice, but it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere further away. It was a radio glitch. Feedback." "It wasn't feedback." She looked at me with her teacher eyes, the eyes that had graded 10,000 lab reports and could tell the difference between an honest mistake and a fabrication. "Did you write clear?" I didn't answer. "Nora, did you write clear?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. For a long time she didn't speak. I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said quietly, "It has your voice now, and the log says nothing happened. Those two things together are very bad. Mom, go to sleep. I need to make some calls." I went to my room. I heard her on the phone, which I hadn't known worked. A landline, old copper, the kind that functions without electricity and without cell towers, the kind that Ganley still ran because Ganley ran everything on systems that couldn't be disrupted by weather or modernity. I heard her voice, low and steady, talking to people whose names I couldn't make out. I slept. When I woke up, it was 3 p.m. and my mother was asleep, and there was a note on the kitchen table in a handwriting I didn't recognize. "Nora, Dale knows. Family meeting tomorrow. Stay inside tonight. Do not go to dispatch. Marlene is covering. Jagoff." Jagoff, the family from Upper Elk Fork. Someone I'd never met had been in our house, had left a note, and had arranged for my shift to be covered, all while I slept. The community was responding, not to an emergency, to me, to what I'd done. The family meeting was at the church. I'd expected a dozen people. There were over 60. Every pew was occupied. Families I'd been logging for 6 weeks. The Praters, the Haneys, the Goffs, the Estepes, the Mackeys were sitting with their coats on in a church that wasn't much warmer than the outside air. And they were looking at me with an expression I can only describe as patient disappointment. Not anger, not fear. The look a community gives someone who has damaged a shared resource through ignorance rather than malice. Dale stood at the front. My mother was beside me in a wheelchair, breathing from a portable oxygen tank, and her presence there. The effort it must have cost her to get dressed, to get into a car, to be wheeled into the church, told me more about the severity of what I'd done than anything Dale was about to say. "Nora keyed the mic on Saturday night," Dale said. No preamble, no context. Everyone in the room already knew. The land has her voice. She logged it as clear. A murmur went through the church. Not shock, calculation. These people were doing math in their heads, working through the implications the way my mother would have worked through a lab result. An older man in the back. I later learned this was Herschel Estep, 81, the oldest living resident. Stood up. "Has it used her voice yet?" "Not that we've confirmed," Dale said. "It will. It's got a dispatcher's voice now. It's got the voice that tells people where to go. That's different from a deputy. That's the one that coordinates." Dale nodded. "The count on Saturday. Was it clean before she broke protocol?" "One no contact at 10 p.m. Haney's line had a substitution. Daughter called instead of father." "Why?" A woman across the aisle stood. "Dad fell on the ice Thursday. He's in bed. I called instead." "Did you identify properly?" "Haney, Doss Hollow Road. Same as always." But the voice was different. The voice was different. Herschel sat down slowly. So the land heard a new voice on the Haney check-in. Then Nora asked a question during a check-in, which is a deviation. Then the land tested her with the radio call and she responded. Then the phone rang past 40 and she left the room, which is correct, but by then, it already had what it needed. He paused. The log says clear. The land says otherwise. There's a discrepancy. The count is wrong. I was sitting in a pew in a church in a county that doesn't exist, listening to 80 people discuss my mistake in the language of accounting. Not magic, not folklore. Accounting. The count was wrong. The ledger didn't match reality. And the consequence of a mismatched ledger in Ganley County was that the land would audit. That was the word Herschel used. Audit. The land would send something to reconcile the discrepancy, to find the error in the count, to determine whether the number of people in the county matched the number in the log, and if it didn't, to correct it. What does correct mean? I asked. The room went quiet in a way that was not silence but consensus. 60 people deciding simultaneously not to answer a question. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was weak. Her fingers were cold. It means someone goes into the number and doesn't come back out, she said. I need to stop here and explain something because I can feel you waiting for the part where I describe the monster, the entity, the thing that comes in the night, and I need to tell you that there is no such part. There is no creature. There is no ghost. There is no entity with a face or a voice or a motive. What is happening in Ganley County is not a haunting. It is a system. The land. The physical land, the ridges, the hollows, the creek beds, the sandstone and the shale and the root systems, and the frozen groundwater, maintains a count. It knows how many living people are within its boundaries at any given time. It has always known this. The Ganley families, going back generations, discovered this the way you discover any natural law, by observing the consequences of violating it. When the count is accurate, when the dispatcher's log matches the land's own tally, nothing happens. The night is quiet. The check-ins are routine. The radio ghost is just a ghost, a residual echo testing the boundaries of the system, easily ignored. When the count is inaccurate, when someone arrives or departs without being logged, when a substitution isn't accounted for, when the dispatcher's record diverges from reality, the land begins to search for the discrepancy. It sends its attention to the places where the error might be. That's what the radio calls are. They're not trying to lure anyone. They're search queries. The land is checking locations, testing whether someone is where they shouldn't be or isn't where they should be. And when the dispatcher, the person responsible for maintaining the log, introduces the error, the land's audit focuses on the dispatcher. Because the dispatcher is the ledger. The dispatcher is the count. If the count is wrong, the counter is the first place to look. This is what my mother understood. This is what everyone in that church understood. The rules were not superstitions. They were not protections. They were accounting protocols for a geological census system that predated the county, the state, and possibly the nation. And I had corrupted the ledger by responding to a query I was supposed to ignore and then recording the night as clear when it was not. The land now had two pieces of information it shouldn't have had: my voice, which it had captured through the radio, and a false clear, which told it the count was accurate when it wasn't. These two things together created a specific kind of error. A dispatcher who was both present and unaccounted for. I was in the count as a resident. Dale had added me when I was hired. But my actions on Saturday night had introduced a version of me into the land's awareness that existed outside the log. A voice without an entry. A presence without a line item. The land would look for that discrepancy. And when it found me, the real me, the source of the unlogged voice, it would correct. Herschel said the correction usually took between 3 and 9 days. The community's response was immediate, organized, and completely unlike anything I'd experienced in 13 years of emergency services. There was no panic. There was no argument. There was a plan, and the plan had clearly been executed before, and everyone knew their role. The nightly count was restructured. My check-in was moved to the 9 p.m. hour, and a second call was added at 2 a.m. My mother calling from the house, confirming my location. The goal was to flood the log with accurate entries tied to me, to bury the discrepancy under a weight of correct data, to make the clear retroactively true by making every subsequent entry aggressively precise. Dale assigned a deputy, a quiet man named Roy Mackey, his nephew, to sit with me during my shifts, not for protection, for verification. A second person in the room meant a second witness to the log entries, which meant the entries carried more weight. The land, Herschel explained, weighted entries by the number of confirming sources. A single dispatcher's clear was lightweight. A dispatcher and a deputy was heavier. If the log was heavy enough, it could overwrite the error. I want to be clear about what was happening here. A community of 1,100 people was mobilizing to fix my mistake using a system of rules that they had maintained for decades, possibly centuries, and they were doing it without resentment, without blame, and without any expectation that I would understand it. They were doing it the way you'd sandbank a river that was threatening to flood, quickly, collectively, with materials at hand. Because the flood didn't care about your feelings, and neither did the work. I had never in my life been part of something like this. In Fairfax County, I was a professional inside a system. Here, I was a person inside a community. And the difference was that the community was the system, and the system was the community. And you could not separate the two any more than you could separate the creek from the hollow it ran through. For 5 nights, the plan worked. The check-ins were meticulous. Roy sat with me from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., logging his own observations alongside mine. My mother called at 2 a.m. every night, her voice thin but steady, confirming my location. The radio activated between 1 and 3 as always, but the locations it named were shifting. No longer testing Stiller Creek or Doss Hollow, but scanning further out, along the ridge lines, the places where the county's boundaries were less defined. On the 6th night, March 21st, the radio called from inside the courthouse. Dispatch, this is dispatch. Confirming, Nora Elkins, present, logged, clear. My own voice, exact, coming from the radio on the desk in front of me, using my name, my words, the procedural language I'd used every night for 6 weeks. But it wasn't a recording. It was speaking in real time. It was performing a check-in. It was logging itself. Roy stood up slowly. He looked at the radio. He looked at me. "It's counting you twice," he said. The radio continued. Dispatch confirming all stations. Prater, Stiller Creek Road. Haney, Doss Hollow Road. Goff, Upper Elk Fork. It was reading the log, my log. It was performing the nightly count from inside the system using my voice, and every entry it read was accurate. The same names, the same roads, the same times I'd been recording for weeks. S-Step, Lower Elk Fork, Mackey Ridgeline Road, all stations confirmed, count is clear. The radio went silent. Roy keyed his phone. The landline, not the radio. He called Dale. I could hear Dale's voice on the other end, flat and unsurprised. "It's in the log," Roy said. "It's doing the count itself." I couldn't hear Dale's response, but I could hear the tone. Not alarm, resignation. Roy hung up. He says finish the shift. Write everything down. Write exactly what happened. Do not write clear. At 5:45 a.m., for the first time in the history of the Ganley County dispatch log, I did not write clear. I wrote, March 21st, 2026, 5:45. a.m. Radio activation at 2:14 a.m. from internal source. Broadcast used dispatcher's voice, Elkins, to perform full nightly count. All entries accurate to current log. Count declared clear by unknown source using dispatcher's credentials. Actual status, disputed. I wrote disputed. I stared at it. 6 letters that meant, the land and I disagree about what's true, and I am no longer the authority. 3 days later, my mother died. Not because of the count, not because of the land, because of pancreatic cancer, which does not care about geological census systems or false log entries, or the politics of a county that shouldn't exist. She died at 4:12 a.m. on March 24th in her recliner, with the oxygen on and the quilt tucked around her legs, while I was at the dispatch desk logging a check-in from the Prater family on Stiller Creek Road. The hospice nurse found her at 6:30 a.m. She'd been gone for over 2 hours. During those 2 hours, the 2 a.m. confirmation call, the one my mother was supposed to make, the one confirming my location, had come in on time. I had logged it. 2 a.m. B. Elkins, Stiller Creek Road, confirming dispatcher location. My mother's voice, on time, accurate, confirming my location. My mother had been dead for at least an hour when that call was made. I didn't work the next shift. I didn't work any shift. I sat in my mother's house for 4 days, receiving casseroles and condolences from families whose names I recognized from the log, and I thought about the 2 a.m. call, and I could not make it make sense. Either my mother had made the call before she died, in the narrow window between 2 o'clock and 4:12 a.m., which was possible but which the hospice nurse said was unlikely given the progression, or something had made the call using my mother's voice, the same way something had used my voice on the radio. The count had my voice. The count now had my mother's voice. The count was performing the census itself, using the voices of the people it was supposed to be counting, and the log. My log, the log I was responsible for, was recording these entries as valid because they were procedurally correct. Right name, right road, right time. The count was right. The reality behind the count was wrong, and the log couldn't tell the difference. On March 28th, Dale came to the house. He sat at the kitchen table where my mother had sat, and he told me, gently, that I should leave Ganley. The log is compromised, he said. Has been since the night you keyed the mic. We tried to patch it. The community did everything right, but it's in the system now and it's using you, your voice, your mother's voice, to validate itself. Every entry it makes using your voice is technically correct, which means the log looks clean, which means the discrepancy is buried, which means we can't find it to fix it. So fix the log, start a new one. Can't. The log is continuous. Goes back to 1974. Every entry since then builds on the ones before. You can't restart it any more than you can restart a river. The history is the current. Then what happens? The count keeps running. It'll keep using your voice to log check-ins. Eventually it won't need a dispatcher at all. It'll do the whole count itself, and the log will look perfect, and there'll be no way to know whether the people calling in are the people calling in, or the land calling itself in their voices. The count will be right. The count will always be right. And we'll never know if we're still the ones being counted. I sat with that. Outside, a March wind was moving through the bare trees on Stiller Creek, and the sky was the color of old concrete, and the mountains were huge and close and indifferent. This has happened before, I said. Hasn't it? The voice capture? Twice. Once in 1991, a dispatcher named Paul Hurley answered the radio, and the land got him. He left the county within a week. Moved to Parkersburg. The count let him go because he was outside the boundary. What about the second time? Dale didn't answer immediately. He looked at the kitchen window. The oxygen tank was still next to the recliner. The quilt was still folded on the arm. "Carol Estes," he said. "The dispatcher before you. She didn't retire, Nora." The Count got her voice in November. By December, it was logging her check-ins for her. She'd sit at the desk and the phone would ring and it would be her own voice calling in as a resident, confirming the location she was already sitting in. She couldn't tell if she was the one being counted or the one doing the counting. "Where is she now?" "She's in the county. She never left. She lives on Ridgeline Road with her sister and she doesn't go out at night and she doesn't answer phones and she's fine during the day, but she says that at night she can feel the log running, like a current through the ground. She says she can feel herself being counted even when nobody's calling." I thought about what it would feel like to be a permanent entry in a ledger you couldn't see. To know that somewhere beneath you the land was running your name through its census every night, confirming your presence, tallying you, and the tally was correct because you were there. But the tally was also controlling because you could never leave without the Count noticing. "If I leave," I said, "if I go back to Virginia, what happens?" "Same as Paul. The Count lets you go. You'll be outside the boundary. It can't log what it can't reach." "And the compromised log? The voice entries?" "They'll persist. The Count will keep running using your voice. But without you physically in the county, the discrepancy resolves over time. New voices replace old ones. The log heals itself. Takes about a year." "And the community?" "The community has survived worse. We'll go back to the way things were. Someone else will dispatch. The rules will hold." "Will they?" Dale looked at me. For the first time, I saw something in his face that wasn't competence or authority. It was age. It was the weariness of a man who had been the sheriff of an impossible county for 22 years, and who was tired not of the work, but of the explanation. "The rules have held since 1974, he said. "They held through Paul. They held through Carol. They'll hold through you. The land doesn't want to break the system, Nora. It is the system. The Count isn't a threat. It's a feature of the ground we're standing on. We built the rules to interface with it, not to fight it. Your mistake wasn't catastrophic. It was just expensive." "Expensive how?" "It cost us a voice, yours, and your mother's. Those are in the Count now, permanently. And we'll hear them on the radio and the phone for years. That's the cost. But the Count will still work. The families will still call in. The log will still run. And whoever sits in that chair next will hear your voice on the 11 p.m. call asking if anyone has come in. And they'll say no, and they'll log it, and the night will pass." I stared at him. "The child's voice," I said. "On the 11 p.m. call. That's a dispatcher." That was a dispatcher. A girl named Margaret Haney. She was 15 in 1974. She was the first one. "She's in the Count." "She's the Count. She's been running the nightly check for 52 years. She calls every dispatcher who sits in that chair and she asks if anyone has come in because that was the protocol she was given, and she has never stopped following it. She is the most reliable entry in the log. She will never miss a shift." I felt the room tilt. Not physically, conceptually. The entire architecture of my understanding shifted, and what settled in its place was something I did not want to carry. The rules didn't protect the dispatcher from the land. The rules fed the dispatcher to the Count. Every dispatcher who sat in that chair, followed the protocols, kept the log, said no to the child at 11 p.m., was training the system to use their voice. The rules were an onboarding process. The check-ins were rehearsals. The log was a transcript that the land used to learn how each dispatcher spoke, how they phrased things, what their voice sounded like when they said clear. And when the dispatcher eventually made a mistake, and they all made a mistake, because the rules were designed to be almost but not quite followable, because Rule 3 required you to ignore a cry for help, and no trained dispatcher can do that forever. The land captured their voice and added it to the census. The count didn't need to be maintained by people. The count was building itself out of people. Each dispatcher was a component, installed through the rules, activated through error, and integrated into a system that grew more accurate and more autonomous with every voice it acquired. Margaret Haney in 1974, Paul Hurley in 1991, Carol Estes in 2025, Nora Elkins in 2026, and my mother, Barbara Elkins, who had lived in Ganley her entire adult life, who had known the count and the rules and the cost, and who had let me take the job, who had told me to follow the rules in a voice that meant, "I know you won't be able to." Did she know? I asked Dale. Did my mother know what would happen to me? Dale stood up. He put his hat on. He walked to the door. "Your mother called me the day she asked you to come home," he said. She told me her daughter was a dispatcher, 13 years in Fairfax County, voiced like a professional, trained to respond, trained to help. He opened the door. The March air came in, cold and smelling of wood smoke and something under the wood smoke that I recognized now. A mineral smell, a deep ground smell, the smell of the count itself. "She said you'd be perfect." He left. "I'm in Herndon, Virginia. I've been back for 3 weeks. My condo smells like dust, and the mail was piled to the door, and my job at Fairfax County is still available, because I'm still on leave and HR has been, in their bureaucratic way, patient. The count can't reach me here." Dale said that and I believe him. The boundary of Ganley County is the boundary of the system, and I am outside it, and I am safe in the way that a person who has left a building is safe from the fire still burning inside it. But here's what I need to tell you. The thing that made me record this. The thing that keeps me up at night in a way that the child's voice and the radio and the ringing phone never did. Last Tuesday, at 11 p.m., my cell phone rang. I live in Herndon, Virginia. I have full cell service. I have 5 bars and Wi-Fi, and I am 280 miles from Ganley County. My phone rang and the caller ID said, "Ganley County Dispatch." I didn't answer. It rang 9 times. Then it stopped. I checked with Dale. He said nobody called me from dispatch. Marlene was working. The log was clean. Nobody called out. On Wednesday at 11 p.m., it rang again. Same caller ID. I didn't answer. Thursday, same. Friday, same. Saturday I answered. I don't know why. I know exactly why. Because I'm a dispatcher. Because when a phone rings, I answer. Because that is the thing I was trained to do, and the thing the count captured, and the thing it will use to reach me from 280 miles away, through copper and fiber and the cellular network that Ganley County doesn't even have. Because the voice it took from me is a dispatcher's voice, and a dispatcher's voice exists to be heard and to respond, and to log the call and say clear, and keep the count running. I answered. "Has anyone come in?" A child's voice. Margaret Haney. 52 years in the count. Still checking, still asking, still following the protocol she was given in 1974. I should have said nothing. I should have hung up. I should have thrown the phone across the room. "No," I said. "Okay." She hung up. I sat on my couch in my condo in Herndon, Virginia, with my phone in my hand, and I felt it. Not heard it. Felt it. A low hum through the floor, through the foundation, through whatever deep geology connects the Blue Ridge to the Appalachian Plateau. A vibration that was not sound, but attention, the land turning its focus toward a voice it recognized, running the count, confirming the entry, logging me. I'm in the count. I left the county, but I answered the phone and I said no, and the log recorded it, and I am in the count from 280 miles away. The boundary isn't the county line. The boundary is the protocol. As long as I answer the phone, as long as I say the words, as long as I perform the function of a dispatcher, the count can reach me. The count is a system, and systems don't respect geography. Systems respect compliance. And I complied. It's been calling every night at 11. I haven't answered since Saturday. But the phone rings 9 times every night. And the urge to pick it up is not supernatural. It's professional. It's the same urge I've felt every day for 13 years. A phone is ringing. Someone might need help. A dispatcher answers. That's the design. That's what the rules were always for. Not to protect the dispatcher, not to protect the county, to build a dispatcher who can't stop dispatching, who will answer any call, who will log any entry, who will say clear, because the alternative is being the first person who didn't. The count doesn't need me in Ganley. The count needs me on the line. 11 days from now, on April 16th, the phone will ring at 11 p.m. and Margaret Haney will ask if anyone has come in. And I will be sitting in my living room in Northern Virginia with the television on and the doors locked, and every rational thought I own telling me not to answer, and I don't know if I'll be able to stop myself. Not because something is forcing me, because I'm a dispatcher. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. The training is deeper than the fear. If you work dispatch, if you've ever worked dispatch anywhere, any system, you know what I'm talking about. You know the phone doesn't ring without you reaching for it. You know the instinct is older than the job. You know that somewhere in the thing that makes you good at this work is the thing that makes you vulnerable to it. I'm writing this because I need someone to call me at 10:59 p.m. on April 16th and keep me on the line. I need someone to fill the channel so when the Ganley County call comes through, it goes to voicemail. I need someone to be more real than the count. I need a voice that isn't in the log. My number is in my profile. I know how that sounds. I know this sounds like the phone call is the trap, that anyone who calls me is putting themselves in the system, that my voice is compromised and the count could travel through me to them. I've thought about that. I've thought about it every hour since Saturday. And I've decided that the risk of asking for help is smaller than the certainty of answering alone. But I want to be honest with you about something because honesty is the only thing I have left that the count hasn't logged. When Margaret asked if anyone had come in, I said no. And it was true. Nobody had come into my apartment, but someone had come into me. The question itself had come in. The protocol had come in. The count had entered through my compliance the way water enters through a crack, not by force but by finding the shape of the opening and matching it exactly. I am the opening. I was always the opening. My mother knew. Dale knew. The whole county knew. They needed a dispatcher whose training was so deep and whose instinct was so automatic that she would answer any call, respond to any emergency, say the words without thinking, and write clear, because writing anything else was unthinkable. They didn't need a dispatcher. They needed a door. And I cannot tell, sitting here in my living room with the television on and the lights on and the phone face down on the table, whether I'm trying to close myself or whether I was already open before I ever left Herndon, before I ever drove to Ganley, before my mother ever called. Whether being a dispatcher was always the shape of the opening and the job was just giving it a name. The phone will ring in 11 days. I will not answer. I will not answer. I am telling you this so that when I do, because I know myself, and the count knows me better, someone will know that the woman who said no was trying to say something else. Log that, please. Just log that the count isn't clear. Someone should know.